Good morning. I want to take you back to 1894, a year when the world's leading newspaper published one of the most spectacularly wrong predictions in history. Picture London, New York, Paris, the greatest cities on Earth, all utterly dependent on a technology that was, quite literally, burying them alive. Today I'm going to tell you the story of the crisis that everyone saw coming, that nobody could solve, and that fixed itself in a way nobody predicted. Because this isn't just a Victorian curiosity, it's a mirror for how we think about the future right now. Here's where we're going. First, we'll understand just how completely the 19th century city depended on the horse. It wasn't a luxury, it was the operating system of urban life. Then we'll look at the staggering numbers that made this crisis real. We'll see how the brightest urban planners of the age threw up their hands and walked away. And then, the twist, we'll examine the solution that blindsided everyone. Finally, I want to ask, what crisis are we staring at today with that same confident pessimism? Let's begin. Let's start by appreciating the scale of horse dependency. In 1900, London alone had over 11,000 hansom cabs. These were the Uber of their day, plus thousands of horse-drawn buses, each needing a relay of 12 horses per day. Do the math. That's over 50,000 horses working London streets every single day. New York was even bigger. Estimates range from 100,000 to 150,000 horses. These animals weren't pets or luxuries. They were the engine of the entire economy. Freight, fire engines, ambulances, commuting. And here's the thing nobody had an answer for. Every single one of those horses was a factory of waste. Now let's put numbers to the problem, because the scale is almost incomprehensible. Each horse produces between 15 and 35 pounds of manure every single day. Multiply that by 50,000 horses in London, you get roughly 1,000 tons of manure dumped on city streets every 24 hours. In New York, the figure was even more staggering, 2.5 million pounds of manure per day plus 40,000 gallons of urine. That's not an annual figure, that's every single day, 7 days a week, with no end in sight. These numbers made the crisis feel not just urgent, but mathematically terminal. This was the prediction that crystallized the panic. In 1894, the Times of London, the most respected newspaper in the English-speaking world, ran the numbers and published this forecast: 9 feet of manure. That's not a metaphor. That's not hyperbole in context. That was a sober mathematical projection based on horse population growth rates and urban density trends. It landed with the weight of a scientific paper. And here's the part that should make us uncomfortable. Given the data they had and the trends they were observing, the prediction was entirely reasonable. They weren't being foolish. They were being rational, and they were dead wrong. Let me paint you the daily reality. In wet weather, streets turned into what contemporaries called manure rivers, a foul sludge that soaked through boots and hems and was tracked into homes and shops. In dry weather, it was almost worse. The manure dried, was ground to dust by carriage wheels, and whipped up by the wind into a choking cloud that coated buildings, entered lungs, and settled on food. Crossing the street was genuinely hazardous. An entire microeconomy of crossing sweepers emerged. People who stood at corners and for a fee swept a path through the filth so pedestrians could cross. This wasn't just unpleasant. It was a public health catastrophe breeding typhoid and cholera. This is the moment that should really give us pause. In 1898, 4 years after the Times prediction, the world's first international urban planning conference was convened in New York specifically to address this crisis. The best urban thinkers on the planet gathered in one room. They had data, they had urgency, they had every incentive to solve this. And after 3 days of deliberation, out of a scheduled 10, they simply gave up. They couldn't see a path forward. They packed their bags and went home. Think about that. The assembled expertise of global civilization looked at a problem and declared it beyond human solution. They were unanimous, and they were about to be proven spectacularly wrong by a technology almost nobody in that room was taking seriously. Look at this timeline. In 1894, the smartest people in the world were certain that London would be buried in manure by 1944. In 1898, the world's top urban planners declared the problem unsolvable. By 1900, New York's horse population peaked. The crisis was, by any measure, still accelerating. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, something shifted. The automobile. Noisy, unreliable, expensive, and widely dismissed as a rich man's toy, began to improve. By 1908, the Ford Model T put automobiles within reach. Within a single generation, not 50 years, the horse vanished from city streets. The crisis wasn't solved. It was rendered irrelevant. And that is the most important lesson of this entire story. Now we need to be intellectually honest. Historians debate whether the great horse manure crisis was really a crisis in the way we tell the story, or whether it's been mythologized for its dramatic arc. On one side, the public health threat was genuine. The filth, disease, and stench were not exaggerated. Contemporaries lived in it and documented it extensively. On the other side, the Wikipedia article on this topic explicitly classifies it as an urban myth. Why? Because cities were already diversifying their transport mix. Electric trams were spreading, subways were being dug. The crisis narrative makes for a better story than the messy reality. But here's what both sides agree on. The solution came from outside the frame. Nobody at that 1898 conference was banking on the internal combustion engine to save them. And that's the pattern we need to pay attention to. And this is where the story stops being about horses and starts being about us. The manure crisis is a case study in a recurring human failure, our inability to predict technological disruption. The same pattern unfolded with whale oil in the 1850s. Dire predictions of whale extinction and permanent darkness were upended not by whale conservation, but by kerosene and petroleum. In the 1970s, the Club of Rome predicted resource exhaustion by the year 2000. They didn't foresee fracking, renewable energy, or the efficiency revolution. The question is not whether our ancestors were foolish. They weren't. The question is, what problem are we absolutely certain is unsolvable today that will look just as quaint in 50 years? If we can't answer that, we haven't learned the lesson. So I'll leave you with this question. In 1894, the smartest people alive were certain they could see the future, and they could not have been more wrong. They were standing in manure, they were measuring it, they were projecting its growth, and they missed the automobile entirely. Today we have our own versions. Climate change, AI risk, demographic collapse, resource scarcity. I'm not saying any of these are imaginary. The manure was real too. The flies were real. The disease was real. But the question is, what's the automobile? What's the technology, the social shift, the scientific breakthrough that is already taking shape in a garage or a lab or a policy paper somewhere that will render our current fears obsolete? Because if history teaches us anything, it's that it's almost certainly something we're not talking about. Thank you.